name is David Zacharias, and it's a pleasure to be showing my work at Milliken Gallery at Converse College. The body of work, the work in this gallery actually consists of three bodies of work that were produced in 2019, 2020, and I'll begin with the Craps series, which is all about the game of craps, the dice game that is played in casinos. And I'm not a player of the game by any means, but the work was produced initially to be part of a theme show, and the theme of the show was called The Art of Play. And each of 13 different artists interpreted what the art of play meant to them, and another artist and I both sort of came up with the idea of games. She produced a series of work about crossword puzzles, and my work was about the game of craps. And what I learned about the game of craps, like a lot of things, is it's gambling. And we gamble every day. We gamble when we get in our car. We gamble now when we step out of our safe place because of the virus. Different people gamble more than others. Blacks and Latinos gamble more when they leave their safe place. So the game of craps fits right into the 2020 situation that we're in now, where we gamble pretty much all the time. The interesting thing I learned about craps was that each combination of dice has a specific name, and it's a slang name, and we all are familiar with snake eyes being 2 1s and boxcars being 2 6s, but all the other combinations also have a slang name. For example, 10, 2 5s or a 6 and a 4 are called puppy paws. Any combination that makes 9 is called center field. Combination that makes 8 is called skate and donate. 7, if it's on the first roll, is called a natural winner. And if it's not on the first roll, it's called Skinny Dugan. How the names all evolved, I really don't know, but it was interesting. The Crab series, one of the concerns for me was how can I make the combination of dice readily visible on a series of pots? And it pretty much left out an awful lot of form. I was almost forced to deal with cones that are wider at the bottom than the top, or cylinders. So all the body of work of the Crab series are really kind of repetitions of those forms. When you work on the potter's wheel, you're not stuck necessarily, but you have 3 basic forms that you can make, and they're based on a sphere, a cylinder, and a cone. And what I try to do I try to experiment with those 3 forms and put them together in a variety of different ways. And sometimes the sphere is really not as spherical as it is egg-shaped, but it's still based on the sphere. So, you know, like these 2 are more spherical than most pots I ever make. But even this one starts to become a dome, which is the section of the sphere. And this is like a sphere that's being squished. So it's sort of like a squished sphere, a cylinder, and a dome. And the markings on the pot, the idea here is the circle relates to the squished sphere, the square relates to the cylinder. So I call this pot square over circle. And we think of squares and circles as being opposite. So we think of, in a way, cylinders and cubes of being opposite, or rectangular forms. So if you start looking at the work, even the cups, they're really studies in form. And when I sit down to make cups, although I may weigh out the same amount of clay for each cup, I'm going really out of my way to not make them similar in form, but, and this is, I think, the trick of making functional ceramics, is to still have form follow function. And it's an interesting theory, I think, when you have to deal with putting those two together and coming out with an end product that is, I think, enjoyable to hold, enjoyable to use, performs the function exactly as it ought to. It doesn't drip down your chin while you drink from it. It keeps your beverage hot or cold. And when you put it on the shelf or set it on the table, you get the same aesthetic pleasure out of it that you would of a sculptural piece. I drink coffee out of one of these mugs every day, and I always end up putting it in the microwave, and I've never had one break. Now, the interesting thing I think about clay, one of the interesting things is if you have a white porcelain clay, it doesn't get quite as hot in the microwave as a brown clay that has more iron in it. And the iron, metal in the microwave can spark. Now this doesn't spark, there's not that much metal in it, but the metal in it does react to the microwave and it heats the cup up a little bit. It's not scalding hot or anything, but it warms it up slightly. The other body of work that came along during the lockdown was a direct response to what people were doing in the lockdown. People were hoarding food, and an awful lot of people had time on their hands, and for maybe the first time, they got real industrious and they started vegetable gardens. So I started making pickle jars for the storage of food as people hoarded and also as people had to deal with perhaps a very successful garden. The next series that evolved from the coronavirus was the planters with saucers. And even in our home, we now have herbs growing in potted plants, pots all around the house that we didn't have prior to the virus. Rather than having to go out and buy herbs, we're growing them at home. So a lot of the work in this show is a direct response to 2020. Most of the work in this gallery has been wood-fired in 3 different kilns. And the first kilns that I became familiar with were at Clemson University, and they have what's called an anagama kiln, which looks like a large overturned boat. It's boat-shaped, and you can walk into the kiln, you have to duck your head, and you can literally park 2 small cars end to end inside the kiln. One end is a firebox, at the other end is the smokestack. And you feed the fire from the front, the flames and the ashes continue through the kiln and exit at the rear. There are 2 chambers on the right and left side of the kiln that they also stoke later on in the firing to build up more heat in the back of the kiln and also to produce a lot more ash. The wood-fired kilns that I have participated in firing do not produce even similar results. For example, this piece was fired at Clemson. I think this is actually my most interesting piece as far as the surface goes of any piece in the firing or in the show, in that there's so much variety, so much was happening on this pot. The wood burning kiln produces results that are not entirely unpredictable, but they are largely based on not chance exactly, but every firing is going to be different, even in the same kiln, and every firing that I have found is dramatically different from one wood burning kiln to another. Now, some people will say, well, why do you want to deal with that? Because I can tell you, during wood firing, when you unload the kill, there are probably an equal number of treasures as there are failures. And in other types of firing that I have participated in, the success rate is much higher. But what keeps me going back to the wood is work like this one, that is so different and is so special, I think, in the final outcome, that I'm trying to go back and get not the same results, but similar results whenever I participate in a wood firing. And what I've found too, that one glaze may work beautifully in one kill and be totally boring in another kill. And you learn through repetition and by experimenting, and eventually you determine, well, I'm not going to use this glaze in that kill, I am going to use it in the other kill. The problem with wood firing is it takes a lot of people to fill the kill, and it takes a lot of people to fire it, and it takes more preparation than any other firing I've ever dealt with. For example, I usually end up at some point cutting wood, splitting wood, hauling wood, then there's the loading of the kill, the firing of the kill, which is usually over a 2 to 3 day time period where people take turns. Sometimes you're stuck there overnight stoking the kill. Sometimes it's all day. And the preparation of the kill is far more involved in the idea that you're going to have to use your shelves again. And they take the same beating as the pots in the firing, so they have to be ground down prior to the firing. They have to be then prepared for the next firing. And everything about it is way more laborious than any other type of firing I've ever done. And if you don't have your own kill, that means you're traveling to these kills, and sometimes it means getting a motel room in order to participate. And next thing you know, you've got half of the success rate that you would normally have in another type of firing, and you've got all these added expenses and time and labor, and the wood burning kill fired pieces, quite frankly, are more expensive because they have a lot more effort put into them. But it's a challenge, and I keep going back to it. I think my work looks better wood fire than any other type of firing I've ever done. If you're compelled to make art, you have to really be dedicated, and you have to be someone who doesn't get satisfaction out of doing really anything else. And that can put you in a very awkward situation where you're living hand to mouth in order to support your art habit. And your art habit is overwhelming. You can't stop. I mean, it's like a disease or a drug. But if you stay with it, that's the thing. You've got to stick with it. You've got to accept the fact that you may have to hold numerous jobs that are not art related in order for you to spend time in the studio. When your friends take vacations, you say, I'm going to the studio. It can be really, in a way, a sacrifice. But the important thing is it's a choice. Nobody's twisting your arm to make you do it. For me, I started out in veterinary medicine and never really thought I would go the direction I did with art. And I was studying at Clemson University, and the School of Architecture had some art courses. They didn't have an art program yet at Clemson. And I just got tired of the science courses for a while, so I took 2 art courses. I had an advisor that would never look at my advisement sheet, and he would just sign it, and he didn't even notice I was signed up for 2 art courses. And the art courses were a revelation to me. They were not only enjoyable, but I think I found myself. And I think that's a lot of what life is about. Initially, you've got to find yourself. And if finding yourself is being an accountant, and that's what satisfies you, you've done it. If it's being an artist, you know, you've discovered it, and now you've got to get busy with it. And in the end, you may spend your whole life doing it, and you get very little other than self-satisfaction out of it. But that's what drives you. I don't know how else to put it. Since I retired, I spent so much time in the studio. And this lockdown put me in the studio almost every day. And the end result was way better for me than if it hadn't happened, in a way. But you just got to stick with it.